The image on the left here is the proto solar disk called HL Tau, thought to be less than 1 million years old, fresh from the molecular nebula cloud or the Taurus nebula. And it has upset the orthodox views of how the solar system formed. The orthodox view is cold accretion, where there is a star, the star causes a dust cloud to collapse, and then planets form in the dust cloud. But this is very hot. In the galactic nebula, temperatures are astronomically high, but once the system is separated from the energy supply of the nebula, it begins to cool. So this is hot going to cold accretion, the alternative theory. Now the reason that I've included it is because the center disk is very hot, but it doesn't appear to have a star. So perhaps the star has not yet formed. And what I'm seeing in the crop circles is a number of instances of a circle that has an indication of a 6-split electromagnetic field, perhaps, with an electromagnetic loop design that doesn't have a star. So maybe what they're saying is that that is a portrait of a solar system before the star has formed, which would make it very young indeed. Now if I put some ratios in there, it's sitting quite nicely on 8538 reductions. If that was the Earth, the orbit of the Earth, then that would be the orbit of Venus, and that would be the orbit of Mercury. And if that was the orbit of the Earth, then that would be the orbit of Mercury. So there's a lot of sympathy for 0.9 ratio or 0.8538 because they do share that increment in common. Something to say that in the early solar system formation, rings were already developing, and they were developing on ratio. If this is very hot here in this ring, it could be that when this hot mist cools down, it condenses into droplets, and you would have clouds of droplets whizzing around out there. And it's the droplets joining up with each other, because it's like molten rock droplets, that eventually accrete into spherical planets that are arranged on these lines. But I think they're in the middle of those rings. There is a hypothesis that the grooves or gaps in the disk are caused by planets, which are hoovering up the dust as they rotate about the centre, but so far none have been found, and it does seem awfully young for fully formed planets, especially since we're not even seeing the star yet. But anyway, moving on. I'd been working on the ratio for this icosahedral quasicrystal, and I hadn't been having much success with the ratio in terms of the way it's reducing from that radial distance to the centre to this radial distance to the centre and so on. Certainly not normal quasicrystal ratio. And in the end, I drew circles on it to match these arcs, and I couldn't help but notice that they weren't going through the centre. So when I saw this, I thought, well, you're not going through the centre either. Why? And then I drew this and I thought, oh yeah, it's a loop, is it? It's an electromagnetic loop all over that field. Is that what we've got there? So it's an electromagnetic loop in the quasi-crystal over that span, which is creating that geometry, and that might give me something on which to further explore that. There's the pentagram there in the centre. Anyway, this particular crop circle design does not end there. There's a panoramic vista of 0.9 ratio increments throughout these circles. All of your classic 0.9 ratios are there. There's your 5904, there's your 8538, you've got 81s, 90s, a 924 up there. Well, seemingly that might be 8538 because the square root of 8538 is 924. But it is a 0.9 ratio, which is made up from the quad root of 0.9, which is 97.4, and three of them. There's one, that's two, and the other one is three. So that makes up that distance there. 924 is actually the cube of 974. And over here to this circle, just to continue the fun, the gap there is 729. The square root of that is 8538. And there is a darker circle just in the centre there, so we'll see if we can't pick that out. And there we have it. And what we find in solar systems is that you'll have this particular proportion centered to the star, and then you'll have an 8538 running between those two 0.729s. That's what we find. And okay, so I'm thinking, well, you know, these are a series of orbital systems. Maybe they're planets coming out from the star. Yeah, well, you know, why not? Condensed stuff, that'll do. But the rings don't continue right through here. And I've always wondered in the crop circles, what do they mean by these little squiggles and fidgets and jim jams and g-jaws that they've got sprinkled around some of these designs? And I'm thinking, you know what? That could be broken up rings. If the rings are broken, they've been broken up for some reason, you might just get left with these objects floating about in space, and you'd have energy spheres, and then the energy spheres would be perhaps linked into strange little shapes like that. And I found this. That is a real object. That is an infrared image from space that actually exists, and it's a line of what I call electromagnetic bubbles that are linked together. Obviously, if the polar axis of the bubble is linked south north, south north, south north, south north, and so on, you'll wind up with a line through the centers of these bubbles, which might even be subject to flexing. And if something happened that caused a reaction in this line going through the bubbles, I wouldn't be surprised if it wriggled. And I think that in the primordial sea, you might have had lines of bubbles lining up like so, where the axis going through the bubbles becomes a spine, and each one of these a vertebrae. And it's an electromagnetic axis, so that might give you the start also to a central nervous system. Yeah, it's kind of what the crop circles are kind of pushing that idea. But that's how life began. There was the energy in conjunction with the bubbles and the nature of the axis and the interaction with its environment as well. The bubbles absorb energy, and it's how they get energy that keeps them in existence. That's why life wants to always absorb energy, even if it's other life forms. This is a moon of Mars, it's Phobos, and we can see the devil's whip marks. So there were rings of small bubbles that this particular rock has flown through, and they've left this indentation from the high energy bubbles on the surface of this semi-molten rock. It was molten. Recent craters have crisp edges, but those that have been there for a while have started to glug out into the molten sphere, starting to disappear, and there'll be plenty of them that have disappeared, and there's striations everywhere on it, plus lots of dots. It's hard to think that all of that was created by bits of gravel flying into it.